do I know this next guest? Well, I don't know whether he'll remember, but back in 2019, we were both attending an international coaching awards in, I think it was the beginning of December. And I happened to be on the same table of this lovely man. And I was also there with my husband. And afterwards, we both talked. You probably don't realise this, actually, Rasheed. We both talked about you and just said, what an absolutely amazing and delightful conversation that we had with you that evening. And Rasheed truly is just so full of richness and wisdom. And if you've done any of his training, you will know that I really do speak the truth. So I am so pleased to have the opportunity of speaking to Rasheed today. It's part of our International Coaching Week special edition. And our guest is a leading life coach, speaker, corporate coach, and author. I'm going to ask him a little bit about his book today as well. And that is Rasheed Ogunlaru. And Rasheed also works alongside Bart's NHS Trust and numerous other NHS trusts on their career development programs for BAME staff and women. And of course, is one of our fantastic trainers here at the Coaching Academy. So please do make sure you've got your notebooks and your pens or your coaching journals, however you prefer to capture, because you're going to capture some real wonderful snippets today. So it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome the wonderful Rasheed. Hello, Rasheed. Welcome.
Hey, Sharon, how are you? I feel as though, do you remember the old show? I'm too young to remember, of course. This Is Your Life. But I feel as though it's almost going to be a bit that like this is your life, but then we're talking about a topic at the end. That's how I'm feeling right now. Now, so first thing to say, I do remember sat on that table, and but I don't remember the conversation. But I do remember many conversations since, and I just want to thank you for all the work that you do in helping providing this powerful and expanding training environment for trainers. And happy International Coaching Week to everybody. I feel really quite honored that we're here, and it's kind of apt that we're here today talking about this topic because inclusion, it's for everybody. So really good to see you all here today. I hope we have lots of fun and lots of food for thought. I can see that Steve is having the food and he's ready. He's already got the food for thought.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, Rasheed, fantastic. Let me start. Let's dive in and rewind right back to the beginning, because a little bird told me that it's 20 years since you qualified as a professional coach. So let's start with you just telling a little bit about your journey to become a coach, from your days as sort of within the entertainment field, and then what led you to train to be a coach and launch your business, and then ultimately to write your very successful book.
So this is your life? So this is your life question. So I'll start off with that. No, thanks so much. So yeah, it's 20 years. I qualified as a coach 20 years ago. I think the coaching journey began about 22 years ago or something like that, when I first was beginning to explore coaching. My very first background was in media, PR, and communications. I used to train people, amongst other things, to be on TV and radio. Then I was trying to pursue a career as a singer and performer. And how coaching first came about was that, so I was pursuing my career I wanted to be a successful singer. I wanted to be more successful than Seal. Anyone remember Seal?
I went to see him live, Rasheed,
Wow,
last year.
Wow.
Incredible. Yeah.
Wow. So, and it didn't happen. I didn't become more successful than Seal. And and the singing career didn't really take off. But what happened was I met so many other singers and performers who struggle with life balance and confidence and so on. And my best friend, Marcus, without whom I wouldn't be here, but he handed me, a leaflet about coaching. I'd long had an interest in personal development, and I was a trained trainer and I was a media trainer. And we wanted to help singers take charge of their lives. And I recognized, hang on, this coaching thing might be really useful to help these performers. So I toddled off and trained at the Coaching Academy. And that was really significant. And I had also, a bit prior to that, or around that time, I'd been a Samaritan volunteer and I was co-director of the Samaritans Central London. So all of these things kind of combined, and I've been on my own, also kind of spiritual, if you like, development journey. So all of these things kind of combined, and they led me into this particular field, and they kind of also gave birth to my approach, which I call Become Who You Are. My approach is all about the inner peace and the fulfillment. My first book, The Gift of Inner Success, was really about that, and then later other stuff. So it's been, so Sharon, it's been quite a journey. The last 20 years, it's been a rich journey. And one of the things I enjoy most within that are the times like this where I get to come back and speak to peers, because I know the journey of being a coach can also be a tough one. Especially in the early years, it can be really, really challenging. And one of the things I love about being a coach is how much learning there is. We're constantly learning. And the topics that you shared, like those upcoming topics, are just a really good example of it. And the fact that we're here having a coaching conversation about inclusion just shows how much the field has expanded in the 20 years since I've been a coach. So it's just a delight to be here.
Yeah, oh, fantastic, Rasheed. As you say, the topic for today is all about being an inclusive coach. So I don't like to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. So I thought perhaps we could start with maybe you sharing what inclusivity means to you personally and why it's important in coaching.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, our starting point is that each and every one of us, and each and every one of us on this call is uniquely different, uniquely ourselves. And whilst there are just so many common threads, but we're different. Our backgrounds are different. Our ethnicity, our gender, our circumstances, what our aspirations are, our personalities, our abilities, our disabilities, our experiences. They're so vast. So we are diverse. We're unique. We're diverse. How we even identify ourselves, what even identity is. We could ask every one of the 100 and however many 38 people currently on the call what identity is. Each person might say something slightly different. So how we see ourselves, how we identify ourselves, and then how we are even in different rooms. How we are in a room with our friends and family might be different to how we are with a colleague and so on. And then when it comes to inclusion, then so we're diverse, but are we always necessarily inclusive? Who is around the table and who's not? So, for example, take coaching. I was thinking about this morning. Coaching for many people isn't inclusive in that not everyone has access to it. Not everyone can necessarily afford it, and so on. And so it's a very interesting area. So for me, for example, the inclusion is who's around the table, who's not around the table, and what we need to be kind of mindful of. And I think that means that we're all, each and every one of us, on that kind of a journey. And when it comes to us as coaches, I think that what is very important for us to bear in mind is, I think there's a number of different dynamics, but there's going to be things that I'm sure we explore today. How do we see ourselves? Who am I? What do I come to the table with? We all come to the table with all sorts of baggage and wonderful gifts. Who are the people I'm coaching? What's going on in their world? And what's the context of that person that they're coaching? Because that will give us a clue to unpack some of these things around inclusion and so on. So it's a really vast area, and it's fascinating. I'm so excited about being here today to talk about this.
It's something that I think you started to sort of talk about it there, actually, in as much as coaching in its very nature, it's not always inclusive because not everybody gets access to it and not everybody can afford it. And I think there are two things there, actually: accessibility and affordability. And it's so lovely to see, I attended a fantastic session actually with the ICF, the UK chapter of the ICF, and they were interviewing, and I should have done my homework actually because the name now escapes me, but they were interviewing two fantastic coaches who were working within the prison service, and they started off sort of doing youth coaching, but they're now sort of as part of the rehabilitation, taking coaching in, and the results were powerful. And it just goes to show, that on the in their day-to-day lives, these young men, majority were young Black men, but all the same, though young men would
Mm,
never necessarily have thought of accessing coaching to achieve their potential,
mm,
and B, possibly been even able to have afforded it. So it's wonderful that there is now sort of pockets coming up, and that again links to another area of diversity, because it just shows the diverse nature of coaching and the areas now that coaching is able to reach, and impact, which I think is absolutely incredible. Rasheed, you started to sort of mention that, and who we are as coaches and what
mm.
we bring to the table. And before we went live, we were talking about power imbalance, and it just sort of occurred to me that that might be something that is worth exploring.
Yeah. There's so much stuff about power when it comes to inclusion and all of this stuff that, so when, even if I am, I started off as a life coach, I became a business coach, and now most of my time is spent leadership coaching and career coaching within organizations. But even if I'm, I say just, it's some of the most powerful work, I'm working as a life coach with an individual in their own career, on their own life and their career. I'm the coach, they're the coachee. And there's a power kind of dynamic. I'm asking the questions and so on, and they're opening up, and there's a vulnerability there. And we kind of expect, and for our skills and our training, we have that ability to create that space in which people feel safe and empowered, and that we're alongside them to help them on that journey. Nonetheless, there is a power dynamic there. If we then take that to, let's say, the extreme, in a way, an extreme, or to after, you're a corporate coach, you're working in a big organization. The person who you're coaching has been perhaps selected for coaching, or they're part of the elite, or the only people who are being coached. And then there's all of the dynamics that are going on in their organization, and maybe they did or didn't want coaching and so on. There is multiple power dynamics, including yourself in that room. And then sometimes that will work in your favor. Sometimes it works against you, because you're then coaching the chief executive. And then there's maybe a power imbalance thing, and you're conscious about that the other way. And maybe they're paying your fees and all the rest of it. There's so many different dynamics, I think, here about the power dynamic. So I think, first of all, we need to be aware of, who am I? What's my own background? What's my own lived experience here? Because that's going to play out very, very significantly on why I've come to coaching anyway, what I'm trying to do. There might be many, what you were saying at the, earlier, Sharon's very powerful. There might be many people here. Maybe you might want to raise your hands, those of you who are thinking about, very passionate about coaching in environments where people may not have had those experiences, so that we come to coaching with all of these dynamics, all these things that we're wanting to do, who we are, our own background, maybe life experiences, career experiences that have shaped who we are. I've had some in the workplace. So we've got to be aware of it, that that's directly kind of relevant, at least for you and your own journey, and why you're here, why we do the work we do. Interestingly, really briefly, I remember when I first trained as a coach, I didn't want anything to do with the corporate workspace because of my last experiences with redundancy, with being organizations that decided to get rid of me and all of that stuff. Now I love it. So there's an irony, but all these power dynamics. So what I'm saying here is that there's all of your personal, your lived experience that's part of who you are. And you need to be aware of that consciously or subconsciously is going to be there when you're coaching people. Now, some of it you've got to park, and we're skilled at that, being very present. But there's going to be judgments, thoughts, noises, and so on going on throughout the coaching conversation or the coaching experience. And some of those things will shape whether you ask certain questions, whether you're afraid to ask certain questions, whether you challenge, whether you don't. There are multiple things that are going on there. And not just when you're coaching, but let's say if you're coaching in a corporate environment, do you ask questions that might help you get a little bit more understanding of why the coaching program is going on? So there's so much about you that is at play here that we've got to bear in mind. And we sometimes forget that because we're so focused on the client. But unless we're conscious of who we are, what we bring to the table, our fears, our doubts, our magic, we're not going to get the best out of ourselves or the best out of the coaching environment. And that was a classic Rasheed long ramble. But hopefully there's lots of things to bear for us to consider, because there's a lot in that suitcase.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It takes a little bit of unpacking, and actually, it's already resonated. I can see Amanda's popped in the chat box that she's actually seen that sort of power used in not a particularly helpful way. And I'd like to challenge you all here today. I mean, there's a huge number, 140 listening to to this session right now, plus more on Facebook, and then in the future, people will be listening to this on playback. And I'd like to challenge you all to maybe have a reflective moment after today's session in maybe journaling on, who am I as a coach? Who am I as a coach? Because who you are is how you coach. And maybe some of that needs a little bit of work. Some of that, as Rasheed says, needs to be parked before we take that. What lens are we viewing our coaching and ourselves through?
And Sharon, you said something so powerful there that if I can add to, I think that invitation for people to reflect is very powerful. I want to add something to it, because I know with many of these things, we want to give people a tip and a tool, something that they can take away. I want to give a first one, and other ones may well emerge here. What I want you to do is I want you to mark out what all of the different events that have shaped you in your life, personal and professional, because they may give you many clues when it comes to when you felt included, excluded. What are all those key milestones in your life, personally and professionally? Don't share it with anybody, because you've got to be aware that when you're coaching, there are things that people may or may not disclose to you. And when it comes to inclusion, there are some things which are evident: yourself, your gender, your ethnicity, your height. There'll be some things that are just there in the room, and there's lots of things that aren't there in the room. And we've got to be aware of all of this dynamics that might well be playing out or not, for people personally, professionally, and with the people they live and work with, and all of that kind of stuff. There's all of these dynamics of people's desires, fears, the power dynamics, their preferences, their prejudices, and what they've experienced in their life. And it does make coaching even more rich, dynamic, and magical. But it does mean that it's, especially if we're working in some environments, I think, Sharon, that with this conversation today, I think if you're a coach and you're working in some environments, you need to be especially aware of this stuff, because there's going to be all sorts of dynamics that are playing out for the person that you're coaching in their organization, in their life, in their relationships. So it's really important stuff.
Brilliant, Rasheed. Well said. And I love that second sort of challenge or tip or tool for people to use and take away. It's all about our growth and self-awareness. You started sort of talking about, and I know that you work with so many different people, both in, the fantastic work that you do within the NHS trusts, but also elsewhere. Would you be able to share a time, or maybe an example of a time when you successfully adapted your coaching approach to meet maybe the needs of a diverse client?
Yeah. I think that the first time that I think I want to bring in was a really interesting one. I remember that I'm going to give two examples, actually. The first one was, I remember when I was asked, the very first time I was asked to do a piece of work where diversity was at the heart of, and inclusion was at the heart of it. I was asked to do a piece of work with somebody with for a specific NHS trust. I'm not going to say where in the country it was. I'm going to say it wasn't in London, but so it's further away. I'm based in London. But it was for an NHS trust. And the person who was coming to me was saying, look, we have issues. There were very, very deep issues with bullying, that some issues that some people experienced that related to bullying, some issues that people experienced related to race, and so on. And when they was telling me this, and first of all, I was like, I thought, I hear what you're saying, but really, is it race? Is there really racism and all this kind of stuff going on? So I had to, in that moment, and from that engagement, because I thought, I don't want to give too much away about my age, although you might be able to guess it from how long I've been in coaching, but I thought, my goodness, there are so many of these issues to do with diversity, inclusion, and so on. haven't they been resolved in the 80s? So that was one of the times when, first of all, my mindset needed to really just adjust to what I was being told and by the client and by the context and what was going on for them in a pressurized environment where people are doing outstanding work, but where, of course, there can be pockets, like anywhere, of all sorts of different kind of challenges. There were, and whether individual, systemic, and other kind of challenges. So that was a time where I really need to very quickly adapt and just hear and listen to what's going on and what's the lived experience of the people who I was beginning to meet and coach in that. So that, Sharon, was really useful for me because it brought all of the stuff I was talking about before to the fore in terms of my own assumptions and presumptions about what might well be going on. But I think another example that I would use, which is quite different, it's a far smaller example, one of the hats I wear is on the life and business coach partner to the British Library's Business and Intellectual Property Centre. And I was running one of my regular events back then. This was before COVID. They were all on site rather than online where they are now. And I was running one of my regular events. It's a networking event. And the two people who I'd known actually who had come along, one was a wheelchair user, one was partially sighted. And the room, how we had the rooms set up, I always like to have the room in semicircles rather than formal, rows, just to give that warmth and so on. And then at the end of the event, the person who was partially sighted said to me, "Oh, Rasheed, the way that you had the room, you had it a number of semicircles, but if you'd had just one, because you had enough room for one, I would have been able to see everybody." Hadn't thought about that. That's inclusion. I hadn't thought about that, just one. The second person who was a wheelchair user, the workshop is in one room, then there's a networking area. The networking area, what do most people who happen to be fortunate to be able to use the legs or are able, if they have legs, are able-bodied, stand up, the seated area. And I think I had a conversation with them afterwards that I came out to the networking area a bit after everybody else, but most people were stood up and they were networking. The person in the wheelchair was excluded. Largely, they were excluded, even though there were seats. If I'd done that again, I would have encouraged people to come in, and in the seated area, didn't cross my mind until afterward. So sometimes with this stuff, we don't know until we know, and it's a constant journey. And sometimes we only find things out afterward or as we're getting to know people. So we've got to remain curious, conscious, open. And for me personally, I've been thinking about this a lot. We can learn a lot from books and so on. And that's great. And courses, they're incredible. I learn through people. So I've learned most of my coaching. I'm learning all the time. I love things like this because they're interactive, they're people. So for me personally, it's funny, I'm an author, but my preferred ways of learning, it's quite ironic to say, for many things is interpersonal, and that's increased since I've been a coach, training courses and working with people, working with organizations, because they'll be full of learning. So I'd say, there'll be times also where you're going to get lots of this stuff wrong, or you'll be intimidated, or you're daunted. What do I say? Can I ask them about their gender? Can I ask them about their race? Can I ask them about their belief? Can I ask them about their faith? Can I ask them about how it feels to be somebody who has a disability? Get used to, we were talking about it, weren't we, before, Sharon, that we're asking lots of people lots of questions a lot of the time that may well be challenging or inviting them to dig deep. We've got to get used to being comfortable, being slightly uncomfortable, and knowing that there'll be those uncomfortable moments before, during, and after. And that's okay. Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable because the classic first one, we think of coaching, what question do I ask them now? But there's also something about what questions should you be asking, or has nobody asked them? So I think, can I throw one last quick thing into the room at this moment?
Please, yes.
Before I forget, I want you to think, everybody, about this, that what would you, thinking about yourself, I want you to think about yourself, and I want you to think about a time when you've not felt included, when you felt excluded. Could be when you were at the playground, when you were a kid, at any time in your life. When did you feel excluded, that you didn't feel included? I want you to write down all of those times. And then I want you to think about, and I want you to think, all of those things. And I want you to think about what is it that you would disclose unprompted. What would you disclose if a coach asked you, just generally? And what would you ask tell somebody if they had made you feel safe? How much of all that stuff if somebody made you feel safe? It's very good, this, because it makes you think about all of that stuff. So unless we can make people feel safe and so on, there's going to be all sorts of stuff we're not going to hear. People aren't going to share. They're not going to open up to us. And there might be certain stuff that's nobody's business that nobody will ever open up to about. But it's good to be aware of all of these dynamics, how they really feel about their boss, what's going on, that are all part of that, the live dynamic of the people who we coach and we work with.
Love that, Rasheed. And I just want to touch on something you were saying there about, safety. And there's some fantastic work by Amy Edmondson. If you're interested in psychological safety, have a look at her research, and some fantastic data there around creating that psychological safety. But as coaches, or for you as a coach, Rasheed, what steps do you personally start to take if you're wanting to ensure as much as you can, because we can't guarantee any of this, we can just do our best, to sort of ensure that maybe the people that you're coaching, or let's even take it wider than that, the people that we are interacting with feel safe as they can be, and feel heard and valued when you're talking to them and when you're coaching with them?
Such a good question. So some people might know, and of course, Sharon, that one of the sessions I run for the Coaching Academy is around mindfulness. And people who know me know that my whole brand is really around the heart. I was saying that maybe this is really, I intended to go there, but maybe this is very relevant to share this quote of mine. And it's so relevant for us as coaches. There will come a time, in fact, many times, where all of the tools and techniques will fail you. Then at last, you must use your heart. I think that summarizes what I'd have to say here. There'll be a time when all the tools, the NLP, the coaching, this model, that model, none of it will work. Many times, it might even happen one moment in every coaching conversation. That's when you have to use your heart. Your heart is the most powerful gift you have. It's the heart that, and I sometimes, Sharon, this is funny. Sometimes I'll say, sometimes in the NHS, I've been in rooms, we talk about power dynamics. I remember once I was giving this talk to this room full of mainly doctors at this hotel, it was this awards thing or whatever. And I said to them, and I, in a way, no right to ask them this question. I said to them, what is it that really does the healing? Before you cut me open, before you give me any pills, would you say it's the case that I have to kind of believe in you or believe in the medicine? Everyone nodded. So there's something here for me about the heart, your authenticity. So we've talked a lot about difference, but your authenticity, this is where you being who you are is your greatest asset. Whoever you are, whatever your skin color, whatever your age, whatever your background, your unique heart. Don't try and be Rasheed Ogunlaru. Don't try and be Sharon Lawton. Don't try and be this person. Don't try and be Anthony Robbins. Don't try and be Fiona Harold. Don't try and be. You've got to be who it is that you are, and your heart. And there might be something, and there's something for me about something, saying something about who you are on your website, about who you are and why you do this work, because sometimes then people will, that might help create some of this space and this psychological safety that people feel, oh my goodness, there's something that about Francesca and what she said on her website, what Catherine said, what Sally, I visited Lynn Elliott's site, and I almost feel as though I know her already. you know what I mean? There's something for me about that. I think that there's something about that, being authentically yourself and being very honest and open with yourself, applying all of the stuff you've learned as a coach on yourself. That's what I did in the very early years. I spent so much time coaching myself, all of the models and all of that. I was coaching myself constantly. We've got to practice what we preach. That will help as well, so that you kind of know what the whole experience feels like. And build yourself there's so many different elements that answer, build yourself a really good peer network so that you can have these kind of conversations, so that you can go on this kind of journey. I think there's many different elements that help us do that. And it is a learning journey. Don't beat yourself up. The things that I'm saying now, I didn't really know many of these things until many years in, and many of them kind of unfolded. And it might well be that your most challenging assignments are the ones where you learn the most. I remember once very briefly, there was very early on, this was very early on, I was actually training as a coach at the time. And I was coaching somebody that was a singer and performer, because that's my background. I think they were a singer and performer. And this is when it's really extraordinary. It's never happened since. He came to me in my coaching studio, and he come in, and he was, you were talking about the trauma coaching and so on.
Hmm.
If he had trauma, but there's a bit where he's talking, and he stood up and he couldn't sit. He was just walking around in a circle. And I think back then, I can't remember how the conversation went. Everything must have been okay, at least at the end. But I think now, being okay with the uncomfortable and just being present and just saying, "Hey, are you happy to stand up? Are you feel?" Just going with the heart would have helped a little bit more. I hope that helps a little bit.
And it's about trusting who you are and that authenticity, isn't it? I think you're so right in saying, don't try to be a carbon copy of someone else. We need to step into that real, true, authentic person that we are, because that, as you say, you mentioned the word magic a couple of times. That's the magic of who we are and how we really coach. I love that, Rasheed. And you really are heart-centered in everything that you do. What strategies do you use then in creating a welcoming space? Maybe, and I don't know, Rasheed, if you have, but if you were coaching maybe someone who was from an unrepresented or underrepresented, I probably should say, community, or a client maybe that felt marginalized, how would you look to create a welcoming space?
So I think one of the first things that's great about being a coach is that there are all of the things that you've learned in your coaching training will mean that you should be able to have so many of the things that will mean that you'll be welcoming to anybody. It's a little bit like if you've done really good hospitality training, that whatever guest that they are from wherever in the world, and they come to visit your hotel, that you're going to be able to give them a really warm welcome. So I think there's something about that, having that warmth and openness in your own heart is really important. And people have got a very high, kind of almost intuitive sense of knowing when they're really valued. I mean, even it's really interesting that when I've done work, and I've done some work in some environments where, for example, where people have had a number of, emotional or cognitive challenges and so on, that when you're still, there's something about, I have a saying that the more quiet you are, the stiller life is. The calmer you are, the stiller you are. Actually, the stiller what you are, the calmer life is. So there's something about you just being centered, be it that's for your meditation practice, that you've gone for a walk, because the noisier you are, if you've got all of that agitation, whoever you are, whatever their background, it's going to leak and so on. And so then perhaps that becomes more pronounced if you feel as though you're coaching somebody who is different from you in some way, shape, or form. It might be that in terms of color, culture, what have you, or age, or environment, and so on. So I think there's something about that, the work that you just need to do on yourself to make sure you're just present. Because I think what can happen, Sharon, is otherwise we're just projecting, oh, this person here or that person there, this is going to be a difficult assignment. As people know, some of the most difficult assignments are people who are very much like you and your family, and just try that one for size, sometimes. So it's very interesting there. But I think that there's something for me about just then being, I mean, people would talk about, there's been lots of work that's gone on, like this, around being curious. I think there are some things about being just genuinely curious, not probing, not overly, but genuinely curious, being open, being aware, that people that there are cultural differences and cultural sensitivities. So there may well be some things there in terms of that might be where we might want to do some reading or talking to people of just different backgrounds about their own lived experience. That might well be very useful. Many people will say, we'll have a conversation, and some people who do some work in the space of cultural intelligence will ask people, think about who the people you surround yourselves with. How diverse are they? How diverse is your immediate circle, your friendship circle, and so on? In everything, race, age, what they do for a living. How diverse are they? That can be very, very, very useful, because that can really just help bring to your own awareness, aha, where am I at here? And so on. That can be very, very, very useful. So I think it's about that openness. It's about every opportunity you have, like today, to begin to explore these topics that you can. I think those things will really, really, really happen. But I'd say that just whoever they are, I think the thing that I've learned, I remember once I was coaching somebody who shared with me that he had Asperger's. And I didn't know anything that much about it. And I just was very present with him. It reminds me of something I learned when I was a Samaritan volunteer. Somebody came in, they did this education session on, it was that related to people with all sorts of different disorders and challenges that could possibly call us or show up to our branch. And they gave us a little bit of information on these different things. And then at the end, he took this piece of paper that he's got this flip chart, and he did this. He said, now just befriend them. Now just be present with them. So there might be all of that stuff. So you want to be open and have some kind of consciousness, but now you've got to put that to one side, because you might think the most important thing is the fact that that thing's a black woman. Might be the most important thing to her that she's Scottish. That might trump the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's black, or what have you. So it's really interesting. How does that person see themselves at the moment? And sometimes people are, I think there's something, Sharon, about, and this is part of the beauty of it, there are so many labels that we often wear, isn't it? Our age, our gender, our ethnicity, our mum, dad, uncle, boss, this, that. And sometimes that's exhausting. Sometimes in coaching, the person just wants to speak. So for me, I see all of those different things as coats that they wear. The other thing that I was thinking of, and I have to say it now because otherwise I'll forget, but it was, I was thinking a little bit about these things about inclusion. I don't know why this analogy came to me. Some people talk about starting line and where you are from the starting line, and what are all the things that's taken somebody to get to the starting line? What are all the things that may have even taken that person for them to get to work that day? For you, it might be, oh, just up to this. But for somebody, they've had to do this. They've had to think about this kid. They had to think about that. They've had to think about the person they're caring for. They've had to think about that. They've had to think about that. They've had to think about putting on their prosthetic leg. They had to think about whatever it might well be. How much time, how many things might be going on for them? But the thing I was thinking about today was like a golf course. Not that I've ever played golf and watched it, but it struck me, it's a bit like a golf course. What are all of the clubs that you happen to have in your pack? Because I've got lots of prejudice of my height, where I went to school. It was a comprehensive school, but it'd been grammar a few years before. There was only a couple of years after they let people like me in. But I'm a beneficiary of that. I'm a beneficiary of that because of my gender, of my height, so many things. I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author. There are all these things that are clubs in here. How many is it? How few clubs is it that might somebody not have? So it's so much easier that when we're playing the game, but how much fewer is it that somebody else might have? For me, that's really important when it comes to things like equity and so on, and being aware I have more club. And if we're coaching people who are leaders, as I do a lot of the time, then it's really important that they need to be aware of it. Just yesterday, I started running a program. I've got to be very brief for this, but it's for an organization. It happened to be for global majority staff, and working with their managers. And sometimes as coaches, we'll be lucky enough that we can raise the consciousness of the people we're working with. So working with those managers and those leaders to get them to be more conscious of themselves, their own magic, their own journey. And that, so for me, my work now is about raising our consciousness and compassion as a species. So as coaches, sometimes you get this opportunity to invite people to open their worldview. And that is beyond, that is the most extraordinary thing. I don't know if that answers the question that you asked.
That's a beautiful response, as always, Rasheed. And there's lots of love for you in the chat. It's really lovely to see. What sort of struck me when you were talking about, what clubs do I have in my golf bag? and maybe I've got more clubs than someone else. But it also occurred to me when you said that, using that same analogy, maybe I use the same club to hit the ball each time, and that might be helpful for me, but it might not be helpful for the client, maybe.
Profound, Sharon, profound. We need to realize that each and every person you coach is different. You can't just have one way that you coach. I mean, I soon discovered, I mean, I'd say to anyone, if you're starting out, first of all, do it by the book, by the book, by the book, coach them, questions and reflections, reflection, grow, model. And as you're learning through your practice and you're getting more comfortable, then, and as you're learning different things, bring in the other tools as so on. I'm a bit of a creative. I love I'll get people to draw. There'll be role play. We'll use metaphor, whatever it is. Who is the client? What's going to land with them? So I think that sometimes there is something about being very flexible, can be challenging. You can't just coach them the way that suits you. Unless all the people who come, the reverse might be true, actually. Some people might be lucky. You might get people who want to be coached the way that you do. But I certainly know for me, people of all types, they come to me, and I'm, in some ways, I'm translucent. I'm whatever it is that they want me to be. I'm all of those things and nothing, and it emerges in that moment. Something else here that I think for me is kind of relevant. I don't know quite why, but I remember when I was a Samaritan volunteer, I used to have this. I remember once realizing, and before I'd been a singer, and it's all me as a singer. And I remember that one thing I loved about going in to do my shift was I felt as though I'd leave myself at the door and just be present for that person. And I learned so much that's been useful for me as a coach from when I was a volunteer about just being present. We've got all these tools and all these clubs, and don't get too lost in them, because remember, the heart is the most powerful club that you have, and everyone has that club. But you'll be amazed the number of people who don't use that club.
No, so true, and I love that, and I love your sort of honesty and openness and transparency in all of that, and really reflecting on that. It helps us to raise awareness of any unconscious bias that we might have in our coaching practice, and just sort of being aware of what we're bringing in to that coaching session, that there may be a confirmation bias, there may be a whole range of different biases that is not allowing us to be truly open and present for the client, which is so important.
Yeah, there's a lovely question, isn't there, Sharon, around, some people ask it, I sometimes ask it, which is, what kind of a coach do you want me to be? Sometimes the person doesn't know, but sometimes even that, how do you learn? There might be questions about how do you learn best, how do you work best, and so on. But there'll be clues, I'd say, on that. There will be clues from what people say to you, and following their thread is really, really useful. I just really briefly, I was coaching somebody a while ago, and I thought she was very, 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 part of her job was very precise and very logical. And there's this huge change going on in her leadership organization. She was quite senior. And then she gave this profound metaphor about how she felt in this. She ventured that she had, and I can say this because you won't know who she is, but she ventured that she loved outdoor, watching certain types of programs, an outdoor adventure kind of shows and stuff. And then she said how she felt like it was like being in the middle of like a canyon or whatever. And this metaphor she offered was so profound, we went with it. It helped her get a lot of insight to where she was. So be it a metaphor, whether it's somebody writing or drawing or whatever it is, sometimes people will give you clues. Or sometimes it's the reaction, well, I can't draw this, but I can write that. Or are they more somebody, it might be, I've got a client who, some of us might be taught to write things down, get them to write it down. I've got a client, she doesn't want to write anything down. She will record the session and it's only audio. She wants to listen back to it. That's how she works best. So we need to kind of be able to ebb and flow, and there will be cues from our clients.
Yeah, and really listening out for those clues are so important. Rasheed, already you've left so many wonderful sort of clues and signposts for people just to pick up and action, and metaphors, etc. And we've spoken about, who am I as a coach, which helps to raise our awareness potentially of what we might have to potentially look at leaving at the door. You mentioned about, okay, sit down with a piece of paper and write down all of those things about myself, the experiences that I've had that have shaped me when I felt marginalized or left out or not included. And also what you've just even been mentioning now. But what I thought might be really nice in our final 5 minutes, not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot, is have you got sort of like a top tip or a quick sort of exercise in sort of 5 minutes that you could take people through that might be really useful to finish with?
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to just throw a few different questions out there. You might want to write them down. You might just want to sit with them. I'm going to ask you a few questions. First one is, why do I coach? Why, you might ask yourself that many questions. Where are my strengths as a coach? What are the areas I'm nervous about as a coach? So homing it in what we're talking about today about inclusion, what am I nervous about? What questions am I afraid of asking? So what questions am I afraid of asking, or might I be afraid of asking? Then which of those questions would it be good for you to ask? Which of those questions that you're afraid of asking might it be quite good for you to ask yourself? Might be the person who, if you're in the corporate workspace, I think also this one, if you're in the corporate space, what questions, and let's say the person who's hired you is different to the person who you're going to be coaching. What questions could I be asking of the organization that might help get better outcomes for them? There might be some questions that may well be useful there. And maybe also there's something about, what 5 people could I have conversations with who I know that will help me grow? And that what 5, who help, and it might be other peers, people you can reach out to, what 5 conversations, because you will grow through that. And maybe one last thing is, what quality do I have that I'm underplaying? See, because you might have the kind of personality where you can ask the questions, those people can ask questions that nobody else can, you know what I mean? Or you've got that thing about weights the date or whatever. What skill do you already have that perhaps you're underplaying? For me, I think in the past, it may be in the intuitive bit. Maybe there's also something about, if you've been in coaching for a while, what is it that people are wanting from me? I certainly know as a coach now, people want me, I am different as a coach now, that the thread is the same, but I am different. I am different. I'm far more challenging now as a coach than I was. I was very nice when I started out.
You're still very nice, Rasheed.
Yeah, our mentor is on the call, and it'll be interesting. He'll probably be laughing if Dan's there. Is Dan there? He'll probably be laughing at that. He's probably having a little quiet laugh to himself about that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely beautiful questions, and some challenging ones in there as well. And there was a lovely one being added to the chat box, which I'm going to ask you all to take away, which was, what does the world need from me now? Which I think is such a powerful one. It really, really is. And when I read that, this encapsulates, I think, our conversation, which in the fantastic quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And if we can't challenge the status quo as coaches and make our world a more inclusive and safer place, then why are we doing what we're doing? Because that is the gift that we have, I feel, as coaches. Rasheed, it has been the most incredible conversation, as I knew it would be, I absolutely love it. Look out for Rasheed. He delivers on a number of our CPDs and has just joined our corporate team as well. So Rasheed also trains on our corporate and executive diploma as well. So do check out any of his trainings because they're always rich so much.
I ask everyone one thing before we go.
Yes.
Who's up for a group selfie? Anyone up for it? If you're up for a
Oh.
group selfie, then I'd love to take a picture. And if you're not, turn your camera off. But you're coaches, so you should be used to being in the limelight.
Oh,
I'd love to take a picture.
that would be great, Rasheed. Love that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Really good to see you all. And I just want to wish everybody all the best in their ongoing coaching. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you, Rasheed, and thank you, everybody. I hope you've taken away lots from that. Please make sure you've written down at least one thing you're going to take away in action, if not all of the 6 questions that Rasheed shared just now. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me here today on Coaching Conversations. I look forward to seeing you on the 11th of June at 12 noon with Mike Blissett. But from me, Rasheed, and the whole team here at the Coaching Academy, stay safe, be well, and I really look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye for now.